Welcome to Your Family's Health, the program that focuses on healthcare issues with unique and different modalities for taking charge of your health today. Experts talk weekly with our continuing roster of guests from around the country and right here in Nassau County to keep you up to date on the latest health issues and trends. Take care of your mind, body, and soul. Spend the next half hour with the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC, and get on the journey to better health.
Hello and welcome to Your Family's Health. My name is Dr. Jeanine Cook-Garard from the nursing department here at Nassau Community College. And today we're going to meet a woman who is a cancer survivor with an amazing story about her unique path to health and wellness. Our guest today is Martha Tettenborn, a registered dietitian and certified Primal Health Coach with over 30 years of experience working in many areas of nutrition, who was once diagnosed with stage 1 ovarian cancer. She is the author of Hacking Chemo, Using Ketogenic Diet, Therapeutic Fasting, and a Kick-Ass Attitude to Power Through Cancer. Martha, I can't wait to hear your story. So welcome to Your Family's Health on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Jeanine. It's wonderful to be here, all the way from Central Ontario, Canada.
Wow. So let's just begin with telling us a little bit about your background and how and why you became a renegade low-carb dietitian, and what does that really mean?
Well, I went to university in the early 80s, so I learned the low-fat, low-cholesterol sort of paradigm of disease and nutrition wellness, and practiced that for many, many years in hospital, long-term care, private practice, and outpatients like home care work. I've done a whole lot of different things over the last 30-something years, but I was never really successful or really felt that I was being of a real help to my patients and also to myself. I struggled with, 30 pounds of weight that just wouldn't go on and wouldn't come off. And so I, in about 2007, I guess, I started looking kind of outside the box of what my professional learning had been, and discovered that there was other approaches to nutrition. Who knew? So I sort of started down the path of low carbohydrate at that point, and discovered the work of Mark Sisson, the Primal Blueprint materials and stuff, and was quite involved in that community for a number of years, just as a user as much as anything. But eventually I decided to put my money where my mouth was, and I took the Primal Health Coach certification program, which gave me a much more in-depth understanding of low-carb nutrition, and started a private practice as a low-carb dietitian. That definitely puts me on the outside of most of my colleagues in the dietetic profession. Now that is changing. Slowly and gradually. There are more of us who are operating in more of a low-carb paradigm, but for the time being, I'm a bit of a renegade in terms of using these alternate nutrition principles that haven't been fully accepted by the medical establishment yet.
So when you talk about certified Primal Health Coach, what is Primal Health in and of itself?
Primal Health is based on the concept of ancestral health. So the idea is that nutrition, how we nourish our bodies, is something that we have come to through evolution. That despite the fact that nutrition is a relatively young science, most of it has only been developed in the last 100 years or so, that really when we look at how our bodies operate in the most healthful way, we have to look back at about 2.5 million years of human evolution. And what have we evolved to be the best source of nourishment for our bodies? And that is not industrial food that has been developed in the last 50 to 100 years. Everything from vegetable oils to vast amounts of sugar to huge amounts of processed carbohydrates and the things that make up a sort of standard American diet. So the primal approach is using nutrition or intake, food intake and lifestyle to more closely align with how we evolved to be the healthiest.
So when you discuss primal health, it is more from a standpoint of a meat eater, or is it more of a vegan lifestyle? Can you define for me or give me some examples of what a meal would look like as a primal health coach?
So humans evolved eating meat. There's no denying that. We have been hunters and hunter-gatherers for millions of years. We are best nourished by eating the flesh of other animals. Our digestive tract is highly aligned with the digestive tract of a carnivore. In fact, we're a very high-level carnivore. Things like the amount of acidity in our stomach and the short length of our colon are designed for the digestion, the efficient digestion of protein and fat from animal sources more than they are the high fiber and low nutrient intake of most plant foods. So it's basically, ideally, a whole foods animal based. That doesn't mean it's 100% animals, but it definitely includes animal protein and animal fats.
Are you concerned with at all in terms of, I know you talked about the evolution aspect of our meat and our food sources. Are you concerned at all with the quality of our meat sources currently and the quality that that's available for the average person with regard to our meat sources? And you talked about us as being more carnivores.
To some degree, animals that are being raised for people food right now, for example, beef that's being raised in feedlots, for example, or pigs that are being raised in large barns or chickens, are being fed a diet usually that is not their natural diet. So they're being fed grains. You know, it's all about the money and making the most food for the least amount of financial input. So if you can feed an animal something that makes it grow rapidly and get fat rapidly, then that's a better option financially than what the animal was maybe raised or genetically evolved to eat. For example, ruminants like cows and sheep were evolved to eat grass. They eat constantly. They have a 4-part stomach that uses a bacterial process to digest their food. But in a feedlot situation, there isn't grass, so they are fed grains. And the grains make them fat very quickly, and that makes them achieve market weight very quickly. So those things are all good for business. They're not so good for the animals, and they're not necessarily so good for us. Having said that, though, really, I think what I usually tell people is eat the best quality meat you can afford. So if what you can afford is standard meat and eggs and chicken and canned tuna and whatever from your discount store, then that's fine. You're still better off than you are eating, pizza pockets or something that's a highly ultra-processed food. So real food of whatever quality you can achieve.
Tell me about your diagnosis with stage 1 ovarian cancer. When did this happen, and what test did you take to find out that you were exactly positive for ovarian cancer?
Yeah, that's an interesting story, actually, because it was the summer of 2018, and I was 58 years old and in perfect health. But I was experiencing a little abdominal bloat, and I just figured that it was because I hadn't lost the 5 pounds that I usually gain and lose every year between winter and summer. So my summer clothes weren't fitting quite the way they should. I actually lay down on the floor one day to do a plank, that exercise where you hold yourself, strengthen your core by holding yourself flat. And I don't normally ever get down on the floor on my belly. And the moment I lay down, there was something hard in my lower abdomen. Like I felt like I was laying on an egg or something. It was very weird. And I immediately just knew there was something wrong. So I sat up off the floor and I called my doctor and got an appointment. And a few days later, I had an ultrasound. They determined that I had a huge ovarian cyst. It was about 16 centimeters across, so that's about 6 inches. Yeah. At that point, that was two months before I finally got it removed. And it kept growing through the rest of the summer and the fall as I was referred to a gynecologist and so on. But nobody thought it was cancer because it was just a big, simple fluid-filled cyst. There was no markers to indicate that it might be cancer. There is a blood test that you do for ovarian cancer. It's called a CA-125, and it's not a terribly good test. There are some things that can make it not be really accurate. You can get some false positives. And the normal range for CA-125 goes up to 36, and mine was 42. So it wasn't very high. And so, again, nobody thought it was cancer. So I went into my local hospital and I had a laparoscopic removal of my ovaries and fallopian tubes at the end of September that year. Again, they took out 2 cysts that were both huge. Between the two of them, I had 1.5 liters of fluid removed. So that's about 1.5 quarts. And 6 days later, as I was recovering at home, I got a phone call that said, "The surgeon wants to see you. Come tomorrow morning, bring another set of ears." And I mean, I work in healthcare. I knew exactly what that meant. So it was the next morning that I found out that I had stage 1 cancer. And that because the cyst had been ruptured inside of me, it was too big to encapsulate or anything in terms of the surgery. So it had been ruptured, and that meant that there was the risk of a spill of the fluid from the cyst, and therefore I needed to be referred on for further oncology. So that's kind of how that happened.
So can you explain what you mean by metabolism of cancer? What is the Warburg effect, and what is the role of sugar and insulin and growth factor in cancer development? Sure.
Cancer metabolism is a field that was understood or starting to be understood back in the 1920s, but was then lost to the overarching field of cancer genetics. And everything that we've done in the last 60, 70 years in cancer pretty much has been based on the concept of cancer genetics. But about 20 years ago, people started revisiting the concept that cancer has a specific metabolic abnormality that makes it different than healthy cells. And this abnormality involves the mitochondria, which are the tiny organelles inside your cells that you use to break down fuel for energy. And they don't work properly in most cancers. So the cancer instead uses a very primitive energy metabolism called fermentation that takes place in the fluid or the cytoplasm of the cell. It's much less efficient, but it's a very fast process. And it's kind of a wasteful process because it creates lactic acid as one of its byproducts. So it kind of pollutes the cell as this metabolism is happening. This was all discovered and explained by a Dr. Otto Warburg in the 1920s. He actually won the Nobel Prize in medicine in 1931 for the work that he did. But then between this was between the world wars, and by the time the Second World War was over, all things German were considered, unworthy or something. And the science was pretty much lost. And then the Watson and Crick discovered the double helix of DNA. They delineated that, and people realized that cancer's DNA was damaged. It was abnormal as well. And the entire machinery of the cancer industry turned towards this genetic explanation for cancer. So the metabolism, because it's energy usage, so you're looking at what kind of fuel the cell can use and how it uses it. There are things that you can do in terms of how you fuel your body that will impact on cancer metabolism.
You're listening to Your Family's Health on the voice of Nassau Community College 90.3 WHPC. My name is Dr. Jeanine Cook-Garard, and today we're talking with Martha Tettenborn, a registered dietitian and certified Primal Health Coach with over 30 years of experience working in many areas of nutrition, who was once diagnosed with stage 1 ovarian cancer. She is the author of Hacking Chemo, Using Ketogenic Diet, Therapeutic Fasting, and a Kick-Ass Attitude to Power Through Cancer. So, yes, I have a question as to the connection now between diet and cancer. What is the connection, and how does one prepare the body or fight this terrible disease through diet?
Cancer has a number of different what they call hallmarks or sort of standards that characteristics that are standard kind of across all different cancers. And one of the first ones that they notice is that cancer has no ability to downregulate its growth. It's basically in the on position, full tilt all the time. And in order to fuel that growth, it has to have fuel supplied all the time. And because it can't use the normal metabolic pathways that are in mitochondria, the only fuel that really works well for it is glucose, which is blood sugar. So it's a cell that is chronically hungry for blood sugar. It has a lot of insulin receptors on the cell surface because that's how the cell draws glucose into the cytoplasm of the cell, and then that's where it's burned to make, in this fermentation process, to make energy for cancer growth. So when you nourish your body using a low carb or particular ketogenic diet approach, you can minimize or keep very low and stable the amount of blood sugar that's circulating in your body and the amount of insulin that is released from your pancreas in response to the amount of sugar in your diet. And so if you can keep the growth factor low and you can keep the fuel low, then cancer doesn't have the, everything it needs to grow at the rate it would love to. And so it becomes a little more stressed that way.
Does the low sugar diet stop the cancer growth, slow it down? How can we expect that this diet will respond, or the cancer will respond in respect to the low sugar diet?
Yeah, no, it's not a cure for cancer. And you can't have zero sugar in your blood or you would die. You can't have zero insulin in your blood or you would die. So it slows cancer's growth is what we think. There's a lot of research still needs to be done in this area. It is evidence-based and there is research being actively done, but it is not at the point where it's sort of widely accepted yet. Lots of work's been done in animals and stuff. So yes, a low carbohydrate diet will put a stress on cancer cells because they have no off switch. So you can't. They're stressed when they can't get enough fuel. They can't grow the way they would like. So it will hopefully slow cancer growth, but it doesn't make cancer go away. The idea that one researcher, Dr. Seyfried, has hypothesized is what he calls the press pulse theory, where you put pressure on the cancer cells by depriving them of the fuel that they wish they had. And then you pulse them, or you hit them when they're already weakened, basically, with a treatment, whether that's chemotherapy or radiation therapy or some of the alternative therapies. So you're basically hitting them when they're down, and that actually makes the treatment more effective. So radiation becomes more effective, chemotherapy becomes more effective because the cancer is already under pressure. Okay,
can you describe the chemo fasting protocol?
Sure. So what I did after I did all this research is I determined that if I was to fast, I would do a couple of things. Number one, I would get my blood sugar and my insulin really low. But what also happens when you fast is that your body goes deeper into ketosis, which means that you're producing ketones, which are an alternate energy fuel for your healthy cells. But cancer cells can't use ketones because they would have to be burned in mitochondria, which cancer cells don't have good mitochondria. So the healthy cells are being supported with the ketones, and the cancer cells don't have the fuel that they want. So the fasting is very effective in kind of making the situation harder for cancer. The other thing it does, though, and this is what's really powerful, is that when you fast, your body is quite used to the concept of fasting, I mean, in evolutionary terms. So the body will go into kind of a quiet maintenance mode. It doesn't do anything it doesn't have to do. It's just waiting for for fuel to be reestablished. And while your body's in that quiet mode, if you receive chemotherapy is basically a poison. It's a drug that is targeted at fast metabolizing cells. And if you can make your healthy cells quiet through fasting, then the chemotherapy doesn't find them. And so the damage, what we call side effects, so the damage to healthy cells that chemo would normally cause is less. And that's the real power, is that your side effects, particularly the immediate side effects of your GI tract and stuff, are much lessened. When I went through chemo, I fasted for 36 hours prior to each chemo treatment and for 24 hours after the end of my chemo treatment. And my treatments were about 8 hours long because they were just long. And so it ended up being a 72-hour fast or a 3-day fast. And I can tell you that in 6 treatments, I had almost no nausea. I had no vomiting ever. Other than when I was intentionally missing meals, I never missed a meal for nausea or vomiting. And my energy was low, but I was never bedridden. My experience of chemo was pretty freaking amazing, given what you hear about. And the other really cool thing is that as I went through the chemos, each one was a little lighter than the one before in terms of problems and side effects. And that's the opposite to what most people find, because they find the chemo is cumulative, the damage from it. So I still lost all my hair. I had lowered blood immune system and red blood cells and stuff. That's the bone marrow that's being affected by the chemo, but not so low that I ever had to have any sort of support for my immune system. I bounced back every treatment to the point where I could have the next treatment. So again, it was a pretty amazing experience, really.
So did you have any pushback from your physicians your oncologists with your dietary protocols around chemotherapy?
No, I didn't. I took in a whole sheaf of references for my oncologist and handed them to him and told him what I was doing. And he kind of said, yeah, different things work well for different people. I'm sure he's had people who come in on a raw vegan diet or something. And so it wasn't until the end of the process, when we had our final conference together, that I was able to really spend a little more time explaining to him what I had done. I have since sent him a copy of my book.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah, haven't heard anything back, but I wanted him to know how important it was that this is what had come out of my cancer experience.
So tell me a little bit about your book. I love the title. I'm trying to distinguish how your diet changed around the time you was getting chemotherapy, and once chemotherapy was over, how are you eating now? What are you eating?
When I was in chemo, I was on a very strict ketogenic diet because I wanted to stay in ketosis the entire time I was in keto. And then I did the 36-hour or the 72-hour fast every treatment. Now I live on a sort of a mostly whole foods, low carb diet. It's not a ketogenic diet. I usually intermittent fast a couple of times a month for at least 24 hours. In February, I'm trying to do it twice a week, but that's just for this month. But most of the time I eat moderate whole foods. I eat very little in the way of grains, and my sweet tooth is just non-existent. I can't even do commercial sugary foods anymore. Wow. They just gag me. Wow. So Yeah, and you know what? I mean, if we're having sushi, I have sushi with rice. But the next day it'll be something this, all meat, low carb vegetables sort of thing. So life happens.
So tell me, what are some ways that cancer patients like yourself can learn to stay positive and learning how to accept help in this area?
Oh, well, you really have to develop what I call a circle of care. So you need, and you'll be surprised who's in that circle of care, because some people will not be able to handle the fact that you have cancer and they'll back away, and other people will step in where you didn't even think, maybe they were barely acquaintances, and they'll be the ones to step up and really help. Being grateful for every day, finding the positive in everything, even the, always looking for a silver lining sort of thing, being able to graciously accept when people give you things or help you. I'm a control freak, and that was really hard for me to be able to be receptive to other people giving me things as opposed to me always being in control and being the one who gives. So that was hard. But positivity, gratitude, connecting to whatever your concept of universal spirit is. For me, it's called God, but everybody's different. Those are the things that will really keep you grounded as you go through your experience. So
if we wanted to get a copy of your book or, get in touch with you, how do we do it? Give us your contact information.
Sure. I have a website. It's just marthatettenborn.com. So it's just my name. My book is available on all of the normal platforms, Amazon in all of the different countries, and Barnes & Noble and Chapters in Canada. It's available both as an ebook and as a print-on-demand paperback, so you can get it either way. Just search Hacking Chemo. It will come up. It's the only, once you start typing the word chemo after hacking, it's the only thing that shows up. So, yeah, it's easy to find.
And what is the one thing you would leave the listening audience with if you had to kind of describe your journey? I don't consider that I'm unlucky that I got cancer. It has sent me on a whole different path. It has helped me to refine a passion in nutrition and a passion to help people to realize they have a lot of power in the process. You're not a hapless victim. You don't have to constantly be at war with yourself or the cancer. The cancer is you. It's just misguided. It's just a misguided part of you, right? But it's still you. So, don't feel powerless. I guess that's the bottom line. You can do things. Powerful words. Thank you for being here, Martha Tettenborn, author of Hacking Chemo, Using Chemo, Ketogenic Diet, Therapeutic Fasting, and a Kick-Ass Attitude to Power Through Cancer. We hope you stay safe and continue to do the great work. And thank you for being our guest today. Thank you so much for having me. It's been wonderful. This is Dr. Jeanine Cook-Garard from the Nursing Department here at Nassau Community College, and we want to thank you for listening to this week's edition of Your Family's Health.
We'd like to get your feedback on your family's health. Send your comments by emailing them to whpc@ncc.edu. Podcasts of today's show are available on iTunes, Android Podcasts, and Spreaker. This program was produced at the studios of Nassau Community College in cooperation with the Nursing Department. Join us next week for another edition of Your Family's Health on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC.